to day 5 of Practical Poetics. I have actually already started reading this morning a little bit. I was in my pajamas, so before I got ready to come to you all, I did a little bit of reading. I actually started reading Dickinson. So there's cat hair because I cleaned. I'm always cleaning, but it's like flying around my face. Anyways, I'm going to start off with Dickinson this morning. I'm just in a mood to read Dickinson, which sometimes that's how you have to get to Dickinson, is be in the mood. And then I'll move on to the last section that I have of the Carson text. And then I also, come on, Hobbs, move. Thank you. And then I also am going to move on to, I did some more shuffling, so I'm going to read the Clifton today, which is what I originally had. Or maybe that was later. I don't know, I've done shuffling. This is probably going to be a pattern with me, is I'll get to a day and be like, I'm going to read that today. And then I'll switch. Oh, this is something I noticed actually. So I watch these to edit, and I noticed in my last one that I said so many times that I was driving myself crazy. So I found that this is also very good practice in terms of like interviewing, because I go on the job market in the fall. I've been looking at jobs already, which this is very exciting for me, by the way. I've lived in Oklahoma since 2020, and I'm originally from the Mountain West. I'm from northern Utah, and I miss the mountains. I miss the dry climate. I miss the snow. I miss the cold weather. I have discovered that I am not a southern gal. I am definitely a northern person. So this is my goal as I continue filming these. Also, the light is hitting my face, really weird. Sorry about that. But my goal as I continue filming these is to just get better in front of a screen, right? Dang it. So I will likely be interviewing via Zoom or Teams, or however they will conduct those interviews when it comes time in the fall. And I don't want to be saying every other sentence. So that was really good to see and to work on now. Anyway, I will be reading Lucille Clifton, Good News About the Earth today, and then I will also likely get to Smith Blue by Camille Dungy, which I mentioned her yesterday because she wrote the blurb on the Amber Flora Thomas text. Dang it. I am going to alert myself every single time, so I'm sorry if that becomes obnoxious. But as I continue filming these, I can only get better, right? So with that being said, I do not have a craft text to read today because I finished it yesterday, which is a relief. I love finishing things ahead of time. This is also one of my patterns where I have pretty high anxiety, and so I tend to do a lot to begin with, and then halfway through I realize that I am significantly ahead, which is great because then towards the end of the week I can either move on to the next set of things that I need to do, or I can kind of take a little bit of a reprieve. And I do know this weekend, dang it, I do know this weekend my note-taking schedule will be quite prolific because I did not finish notes for the theory and craft text from last week. I almost did it. And I think I have 1 or 2 creative texts from last week that I need to finish notes on. So it will be good to have that extra time this weekend to complete those notes. And with that, I have my coffee, I have my water, I also have my elixir of life, this is not another. So nothing that I mention in any of these are sponsored by any of these companies. Like, I'm not sponsored by Goodreads. I'm not sponsored by Gatorade, of course not. However, this is by Naked, the green machine. I love it. I love drinking at least 1 cup of these every single day. It's such a good boost of greens. It has so many fruits, so many vegetables in it. At least that's what the ingredients say. So I very much enjoy that drink. And it is 8:24 right now. I'm probably gonna read for the next hour. I'm getting a little hungry, but I'm not so hungry that I want to make breakfast first. So with that, man, I'm gonna get better. Alin, you can only get better. I am going to start with Emily Dickinson. I read Dickinson for an hour. It's been an hour, and I got to page 67. I have read through, so Dickinson's work is categorized by year because I don't remember how many years she wrote, but she only published maybe a handful of poems. Her first published poem, which was the second in this collection, is called Sic Transit Gloria Mundi, and it was first published in the Springfield Republican in, where did she live in Massachusetts? I don't remember the town right now. But it was published in 1852 without her consent. I read that recently. So I've read from 1850 to 1860, about a decade of poems. There are 129 poems so far that I've read. So I will maybe come back to this later. I did the math, so if I read Dickinson today, tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday, that is 159 pages of Dickinson per day. So that would put me in poem 353. It's really interesting to come back to this. So the last time I read this collection was in 2021, spring of 2021. I took this really phenomenal class with Dr. William Decker, who's another one of my mentors here at Oklahoma State. He actually just retired this past spring, which I'm so happy for him, and I'm really sad for all of the students who didn't have the opportunity to take a class from him, because he's brilliant. And we read, his class was a class on Whitman and Dickinson, so we read the entire collected works of both of those authors, which was really cool. It was cool to kind of like transition in time back to the 19th century in a time of romanticism. So Whitman is known for his romantic ideology towards nature, and I later found out he wasn't that popular in the 19th century. It wasn't until much later, I think during the modernists. I will have to, maybe the transcendentalists. That was all kind of the same time period in the early 20th century, who came back to Whitman and realized what a genius he was with his language and his poems. And Dickinson is argued, there is an argument surrounding her that she was not a romantic poet. So I'm thinking about that as I'm reading this, and it's also interesting to see like the notes that I made almost 5 years ago now, which I used to make notes in pen, because I was like, okay, I am committed to this idea. And now I make all of my notes in pencil. And so I kind of wish that I would have continued, like, made notes in pencil, because, I mean, it's interesting to see what I was thinking about, 5 years ago, but a lot of my thoughts were surrounding death 5 years ago. Not death of the self, by the way. That has nothing to do with what I was thinking emotionally and mentally. But Dickinson is often, often consumed, or often written as being consumed by death. So it's really interesting to go through and read from an eco-critical standpoint to parse out the poems that are really speaking to the theoretical works that I'm reading right now. So it's just interesting. All right, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to make myself some breakfast. I am going to, continue working on not saying or or any of these filler words that we are taught to eliminate within the poetic line. It's so funny. So I did have this issue when I was in my undergrad, and then you had, I'm sure that those who are watching who've gone through higher education or even like secondary education, I'm sure secondary education teachers have brought this up, especially during presentations, where we are taught to not use filler words when we present. And I got really good at not using filler words, but I haven't been in front of a classroom since I think 2023. I moved full-time, so I am one of the associate editors for the Cimarron Review, which is the graduate literary magazine at Oklahoma State University. So I haven't had experience in about 2.5 years being in front of a group of people. And it's just so interesting to me that you lose technique, if you don't practice it constantly. So again, I'm really grateful that I can practice better presentation technique through this whole experience. Anyway, all that to say, we'll come back to Dickinson later. I'm gonna eat and then I'll come back and we will get started on Carson. Okay, we are back and ready to go. I had eggs and potatoes and turkey bacon for breakfast. It was delightful. And every single time I talk slower now, it's because I almost said the forbidden filler words. So that might be a result of me practicing not saying filler words, is that I talk slower to make sure that everything I'm saying is intentional. So the next book is finishing Carson's Silent Spring, and I'm gonna go ahead and just get right into it so we can get this done and I can check it off my list. I have updated my Goodreads to reflect the books that I've read like yesterday and how far I am in Dickinson's work. And yeah, I think that's about it. Not done with Carson yet. I got to page 229 and I'm supposed to read to page 258. So that's about 30 pages more. Today's reading was really challenging. I don't know if you can tell in the time lapse how my face went from more cheerful to very solemn as I continued reading. The chapters that I read this morning, right now it is almost 12:15, so I read for about 2 hours. But I read a chapter, it's called Through a Narrow Window, and that went over the biological process of the mitochondria and how the enzymes within that cell proliferate the ability to produce life, and how herbicides uncouple these cells and destroy their reproductiveness. It then goes on to describe and analyze how these chemicals harm animals and plants, including humans. Then the next chapter is called One in Every Four, and this chapter was particularly harrowing to the extent where it made me really nervous, actually, really fearful. But it went over how those chemicals, especially arsenic, causes mutations and cancer in humans, and it discussed how many other things humans use have cancer. Cancer-producing materials in them. So this is like clothing, cleaning supplies, makeup, water bottles we drink out of, all things like this that mutate cells. And it talks about how long-term exposure to these types of substances is actually more harmful than one single massive exposure, because the cells that are killed within the human body from the exposure have ability to reproduce and fight off those mutations, whereas continuous small doses of exposure proliferate the mutation to reside within the cells and then eventually mutate into something that is fatal or lethal. So that chapter was really hard to read, actually. It was really, really hard to read. And I am of the opinion that everyone should read this book, even though it was published again in, I think, the early to mid 60s. So, what is that? 60s to 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 10s, 20s. So 60-ish years ago this book was published, and I do think that a lot of what Carson was talking about 60 years ago is still pretty relevant to today. I was thinking about how gene mutations, so she talks a lot about how gene mutations occur from an exterior like inhaling or consuming an exterior chemical can result in eggs, right? So this is like human eggs, insect eggs, animal eggs, plants, anything that exists within the ecological spectrum is affected and mutated in a way that results in either birth defects or currently dormant dormant mutations that eventually come into play. And it's pretty freaky. So yeah, that chapter was pretty rough to read. Then the next chapter I read is called Nature Fights Back, and it discusses how nature has its natural defenses against pests already. And by humans spraying or utilizing the chemicals that we utilize, we get rid of the predator of the pest. Like, we get rid of the pest and the predator, but then the predator can't make a comeback as quickly as the pests make a comeback. So then the pests come back between 3 to 10-fold, and it doesn't have a predator to check that population. So we actually saw this, an example that I was thinking of, and this was something that was coming up in conversation back in 2022, and many of you might remember this, but in the 90s, dang it! Oh, Lynn, stop saying that. I'm gonna start counting how many times I say that. So in the 90s, there was a push to eradicate wolves from the Yellowstone area and the surrounding areas in Idaho. I'm more familiar with the Idaho side. But, I mean, Yellowstone is in Idaho, Montana, and I think it's those two states. I want to say Wyoming, but I don't think it's Wyoming. But people eradicated the wolf population from this location because wolves were starting to prey on livestock, and there was an issue with human interaction between the wolves. But as a result, so deer, their predator is the wolf. And after the wolves were eradicated, the deer population surged, which meant that there wasn't enough ground foliage to supply the diet of the deer. And as a result of that, these locations became more susceptible to wildfires in a very catastrophic way. So through the decades, so I think I need to rephrase that. I think the wolves had been eradicated far before that. And then in the 90s, they started reintroducing wolves to the area to control the deer population because of the wildfire issue. Which, again, I'll have to look up exactly the timeline of this whole thing. But in 2022, the wolves had made a complete comeback, and there was not enough prey for the wolves to go after, so the wolves were again in people's farmlands, killing livestock, killing pets. And so Idaho passed a law where it became legal again to hunt wolves, and not only hunt adults, but also like kill litters of wolves, which is pretty despicable. I just said again. I'm gonna drive myself insane. But, dude, can you move? So Idaho reintroduced a bill where people could hunt for wolves once again to control, initially, a human-caused issue, right? So it's a vicious cycle where human tries to control nature, and then a version of nature that humans don't like comes back in full force, and then that causes another issue, whether it's environmental. Well, it's usually environmental, and you would think that the human species would get smart enough to realize how to approach all of these issues in a logical and rational way, instead of consistently going back and forth with this idea that humans really have to control this and utilize chemicals and utilize more volatile ways to appease. I don't know. These are just my musings on this, and I'm reaching like 10 and a half minutes. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take a break. I'm going to eat some lunch. I will obviously I'll come back, but I have about 30 pages left of the Carson text. I am tempted to not read it today because it was so sobering. Ugh, it's so stressful to read this woman. But that being said, to everyone who watches this really is a book that every single household, every single person should be reading. I think that this book should probably be taught in schools, even though it's antiquated. I think that this book should make a comeback in higher education. I really think that I'm sure that there's been research recently or more recently obviously, that has continued the research that Carson was doing, because I believe Carson passed away from breast cancer, by the way, in the mid to late 60s, like just after this book was published. So yeah, I just think that this book is like very necessary for every person to have read. So that is the book recommendation you will get from me so far. Okay, I'm gonna go eat, unwind, try to regain my chipperness. Okay, hello, I'm back. I had a lovely salad for lunch, and I also decided I am not going to continue reading Carson today. That it really zapped my energy and my mood and made me super anxious, which is good, right? Like that's the sign of like a really well-written book. Dang it, that freaking word. I'm gonna get so frustrated with myself. But a well-written book, well-researched. She really put she dedicated, I think, like a decade or longer to putting this together. So, as I said in my last little snippet, it's definitely a book that everyone should be reading. All that to say, I'm not going to finish it today because I just don't think I have the mental capacity, to be honest. I think I need to finish that tomorrow. And I'm going to move on to Lucille Clifton, Good News About the Earth. I have a feeling that this will be, hopefully it's good news about the earth, right? I have read other collections by Lucille Clifton. I love her work. She is was a phenomenal poet. And yeah, I always enjoy reading stuff by her. And then I will move on to Smith Blue by Camille Dungy. Camille Dungy is also another poet who I really enjoy reading through. As I said yesterday, I read Dungy's book, Tropic Cascade, for my literature exam last year. So I'm excited to read another collection by Dungy. And yeah, we'll get to it. From Clifton to Dungy, and I decided to pause because I have this note in this book that says, a birthday gift to Renee, another year, another tear. Is that a smile? Yes. And it says on the next page, Renee Wolfe, March 1976. I am suspicious. I don't know if this was a gift from one person to another, or if this is the scribing of Lucille Clifton herself. So I'm gonna have to look up handwriting samples of Lucille Clifton. That being said, this was a great read. Lucille Clifton is such a powerful poet. This book is comprised of not only civil justice poems and women's rights poems, but also towards the end a retelling of a retelling of stories from like biblical stories, which is just really, I mean, I have marked 5 poems here that I want to come back to. I've also started marking lines to create a poem from lines of the text that I'm reading. And I believe that's called a cento poem. However, I am hesitant to say that because I don't remember if that's actually the right term for that poem. I do know that's a form, though, that you can use. So I'll look that up and then I'll get back to you guys to make sure that I'm talking about the right form. That being said, I finished the Clifton. It was lovely. And then I moved on to Smith Blue, and then this is the reason I stopped. So I brought up the handwriting in the beginning of Good News About the Earth, and I opened up Smith Blue. This is an autographed book by Camille Dungy. And so I was like, oh man, what if I got so lucky to have 2 autographed books? I bought all of these books secondhand. So how cool would it be if both of these are actually autographed, even if the other one doesn't have Lucille Clifton's name? So that's the only reason I came back really quick to say that, and I'm gonna move on to Smith Blue. I really enjoy Dungy's work. This collection really mused over love and loss within and outside of the human body, and also I feel like you could probably connect the other pretty successfully to a lot of the writings that she's done in this collection. I've tabbed 3 poems to come back to, and I also tabbed, so I did look it up. It is a cento poem where the poet compiles lines from other poems by other poets and then crafts a poem based on those lines. Cento is the Latin word for patchwork, so it's considered a patchwork poem. So I've never written one of those, and I want to. All that being said, I really enjoyed this collection. It was really beautiful. Dungy is how she navigates the page and space is just really awe-inspiring, I guess, is how you could say that. And just how she navigates language. I mean, most of the poets I'm reading are poets who have won like major awards for their poetry, right? There are a few who are newer, who maybe have not been in the poetic scene for a long time, but Dungy has been around for a while. However, that being said, the majority of the poetic works I'm reading are from the 21st century. I really wanted to focus on hyper-contemporary poetry in this exam because I want to see how those poets are interacting with the page, words, language, nature in a global climate that is deteriorating very quickly. And my literature exam, I think I did mention this in another film. My literature exam covered poetry from the 18th century to the 21st century. So again, not that I know everything from all of those centuries, but I have a decent foundation of at least my area of expertise from those centuries. So anyways, I wanted to study primarily 21st century work, but of course, like Clifton, this was published in 1972, so that's a 20th century work. And all that to say, I am already over 30 minutes on this. I need to get better about that. I'm not going to say there was one of my sections in here was 11 minutes long, so I will try to cap myself. I also think that's because today I was because I've realized that I'm using unnecessary filler words as I speak. I think calling those out has slowed down my communication skills and patterns in the video. But all that to say, I'm not gonna read anymore today. It is almost 3 o'clock, so I am done early, and I feel okay about that. I finished 2 more books today. I am almost finished with the Carson text. I have a good start on the Dickinson text. I don't know if I'm gonna read all of the Dickinson, just because I've read it before, so I might pick and choose with a text that thick. But yeah, shout out. I have I think 2 new subscribers since yesterday, which is really exciting. So welcome. I'm so excited to have you guys here. And I'm excited. Again, I said this in another video, but I just really think it's cool that people are subscribing to this series. And I would really encourage you guys to have, like, if something comes up or you have a question about anything that I'm talking about or you want to learn more, please ask questions in the comments. I will respond. So yeah, I think that was my only little housekeeping item. And yeah, this concludes part 5 of the Practical Poetics study series. See you guys tomorrow.